Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. You can find us every Friday, 10 a.m. on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Or as always, you can listen on your favorite podcast app. This is episode 29. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from The Truth Out, The Guardian, NPR, CBS News, Brookings.edu, and Huffington Post. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into the article entitled, Why Biden Needs Black Men.
Personality.
Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question.
Okay, what question do you have for us this week?
My question is in regards to what happened in Philly, where Walter Wallace Jr. was shot and killed in the midst of a mental health crisis, and how our trauma goes undiagnosed and undertreated. Having the limited choice of treatment providers, psychiatrists, and other mental health professionals readily available to de-escalate these situations, what is the ADOS community to do to get some relief from our traumas when the help to those problems is non-existent?
Well, from the Breonna Taylor case to the George Floyd case to the obvious mental health case of Mr. Wallace Jr., it's the same design, that we have been impacted by being bottom caste in this society. And this is one of the ways it reveals itself. In the mental health crisis, everyone will easy to jump on the idea that social services of some kind should have been involved, which is true. Is that the same thing for George Floyd? Didn't he need social services so he wouldn't be in the situation that he was in? See, this goes all the way down the line. The issue is that we're bottom caste, and we've got to connect what's happened here instead of literally having our toes stubbed by this horrible occurrence and just focusing in on it as a police matter or just as a mental health matter. It's all connected. We are bottom caste. This is what happens disproportionately to bottom caste people. And it's lack of resources. It's lack of therefore services. It's lack of therefore the system providing supportive services that everybody needs, but particularly the bottom caste in the society needs to address this very situation. So to answer it, what we need is reparations and a black agenda where we are definitely a protected class so that in the future, the family has the mental health needs it has because they can afford it. And if emergencies arise, they can also both afford, or the system in protecting us will provide the social services needed to address the situation, with police and security forces being last on that type of an agenda. That's would be the answer to this.
In the past, and I believe this is why we were heavily religious, because a lot of that spirituality was our only recourse to the traumas that we had, even whether it was temporary. You had to go every Sunday to get Jesus because you needed that type of mental relief. We don't go to church as much as we used to. Not collectively as community. People still go to church, collection plates are full, every week. But what I'm saying is that, depending on how you feel about religion, it had an effect. temporary or not, whether or not people would get in. Then we couldn't afford mental health services, or they weren't provided in our community. What we did have was liquor stores. What we did have was all of the negative things that was in our community to self-medicate ourselves with our mental health. So we've negatively dealt with our traumas for majority of most of us, because services just weren't available, or services that were available we couldn't afford. And the other side of it is just not trusting, honestly, white mental health professionals. A lot of times, we are the guinea pigs to a lot of our health industries and what they plan to do. Their medications they give us.
The book Medical Apartheid explained it well.
So, with all the things I just listed, it still boils down to we're not getting help, and we need the help. And reparations, yes, we're fighting for it. Black agendas, yes, we're fighting for it. What do we do in the meantime? And
you open up another can of worms, and I've got to go there too. While you mentioned about our religious attendance going down, and I only want to say that that's happened across the board with all Americans. Capitalism is draining our spiritual might. That's one thing. The other thing is, while we can take a category like religion and say that we're not participating in it, which would be a source of relief for us, as it was, I will take nothing away from that. At the same time, our music has also been commodified so much that it's reflecting something that's not of us anymore. I have a fantastic friend who speaks on this often on Facebook, particularly, saying there's a Black soul code that was found in our music, found in our religious practice, found in our communications with one another, that's being depleted. That too is being sucked out by white domination, racist capitalism. And we're experiencing the vestiges of that. So I definitely agree with that take on it. At the same time, a long-range solution, not total, but long-range solution, is back to reparations, a Black agenda, and enforced protections that will adequately deal with all this until we find ways back to our souls.
In the Breaking Brown video that Yvette did last week in regards to this very story, her angle was needing a very specific type of Black therapist. Now, if you're going to seek out and get services to the traumas and the things that you may or may not be willing to face right now, but are dealing with the symptoms of those things, when you do seek out to get a therapist, it's very personal.
Yes, it is.
You're going to have to shop around in a sense till you find the right person that the way she described it, all the way down to the zip code, which is, are you from my neighborhood? Are you from my, not only are you from my city or state,
have you shared my shared experience?
Yes. Do we deal with the same things? Now, you could be a Black therapist that live, very high middle class, trying to give assistance to those people that can't afford food. Can you relate to somebody that can't afford food, can't afford the lights that they need in their home, can't afford to provide for their families, and you relate to them?
That is the challenge of being in a white domination racist system and culture. I worked in mental health systems for 30 years. I was a therapist for the last 20 years, working with populations that people virtually didn't want to work with nationally, and I was a part of a group that was number one in doing it in the nation. There's resistance for Black thought, because that's what ultimately you're calling for. And you have exceptional Black therapists who are able to either get free or operate within some of those circles to do it freely. So ultimately what I'm identifying here is that we're the minority within a minority within a minority. And there are Black therapists out there that can make those jumps, even if they didn't have those exact life experiences. Good therapists, again, are very rare, can do those very things. The problem is they're extremely rare because they're not supported in the overall systems, because we're in a white domination racist system. I made those complaints myself, and I also got pushback for doing those things. And so I understand that it's difficult to shine in areas that are needed, particularly for our population. And that should be our focus. Instead, our focus, sadly, is going to be on the temporary, which is what we need to do to prevent police from being trigger happy around mental health disorders. And that is a justifiable approach that we need to take and stance we need to take. But we're going to take away from the focus that it really needs to be on, the long-term solution to this problem and crisis.
Something that you mentioned a lot on this podcast, and that is the youth and the suicide rates.
Oh God.
And then just how the black youth suicide rates have increased.
Yes. And numbers never seen before since that crash of 2008.
So is that a reflection of nothing? Well, not nothing, but
It
is
is
that a
nothing.
reflection?
The mental health services in this society has not responded to the obvious and adequate need. All the media does is lament how bad it is, and the mental health services just document it.
Yeah, so it's something that we're facing as a community, really individual by individual. It's not a collective fix in a sense for our community. So it's going to be right at this point, it's going to be a personal choice for you to seek out assistance for yourself and or your children. First, recognizing that there is an issue, and then trying to find a culturally connected person to assist you in walking through those traumas and issues that you may have. Now, it's hard to fix yourself in a broken community. I will say that. So yeah, it will be difficult, you working through your problems and then have to come out into a community where it's still broken. The vices of the negative vices are still readily available. It takes a strong self-esteem to get through this world as a ADOS person living an ADOS life. It used to be stronger. Our self-esteem has taken a hit. Where I'm not quite sure.
With a media system that tries to drive wedges between you on gender issues, and then further genderize the gender issues into what sexual display that you have. You are in a system, a white domination racist system that attempts to do that. You are always going to be scrambling. And that's the plan.
Your whole life.
Yes.
Undermined it.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll list a few things for you to be able to connect with on our website. Suicide prevention, some here locally, some places that you can go. But we also want you, wherever you are living and listening to right now, if you're in need of help, please reach out. Let somebody know. Maybe they can get you some resources. All right, that's it for this week's Personality Piece. Check back next week and see what do I usually say?
I don't know.
Check back next week. We got some thoughts about some things.
Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. You can also get more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda. Please visit ADOS101.com. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
The Black Church has been getting souls to the polls for more than 60 years. From the publication The Conversation, author and writer David D. Daniels III. At black churches up and down the U.S., religious slogans have been supplanted with another message in the run-up to November 3rd. The landscape of the 2020 general election has been dotted with efforts by the black church. Churches that have traditionally had predominantly African American congregations to encourage voter registration, mobilization, and protect against efforts to suppress the vote. Under slogans including Souls to the Polls, AME Voter Alert, and Kojic Counts, black denominations and national bodies such as the Conference of National Black Churches have partnered with civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, in a concerted effort to increase voter turnout among African Americans. The push comes amid deliberate tactics to make it harder for Black and Latino Americans to vote, including purges of voter rolls in the communities of color, strict voter ID rules, and restrictions on polling places. As a historian, I know these tactics are nothing new, nor is the role of Black churches in countering these moves. Black church-led campaigns to expand and protect voting among African Americans reaches back to the years following the Civil War. At political forums held in churches, clergy educated congregants on political issues, regularly running for elected office themselves. I graded this article okay. Up next.
From the publication Truth Out, entitled, "You Cannot Decarcerate by Using the Tools of Incarceration," says Mumia Abu-Jamal. Writer Maresi Starsman. The somber baritone of Mumia Abu-Jamal is unmistakable. Abu-Jamal is phoning from State Correctional Institution Mahanov, a medium security prison in Pennsylvania. Convicted in 1982 for the alleged killing of white Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner in a racially charged trial that, according to Amnesty International, failed to meet international standards. Abu-Jamal's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in 2011. In April 2019, a new path for Abu-Jamal to appeal his life sentence was opened by reform-leaning Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, who withdrew his initial opposition for a new appeal to go forward in the courts. Yet, 64-year-old Abu-Jamal remains skeptical when it comes to criminal legal reform in the United States. Despite calls to defund the police and a string of electoral victories for more progressive prosecutors like Krasner, the current administration is actively rolling back reforms. Maresi Starsman asks, Donald Trump claims to have instituted prison reforms because he introduced the First Step Act, a bipartisan federal sentencing and reform bill, and granted clemency to several select high-profile or celebrity prisoners. What do you make of this? Abu-Jamal responds, Trump is a wolf. He does not understand the meaning, much less the function of the word empathy. One cannot seek to help the people who are caged in this carceral state without empathy. Trump really has no substantive prison reform programs at all, but he takes a thimble and makes a bucket out of it. I've heard him in debates talking about prison reform, but that's not really what he supports. It is a political tool meant to pry people away from other candidates in support of his re-election. While it is true that some people have gotten out on the First Step program, Trump has also supported the reinstitution of some of the most repressive institutions in the carceral state, private prisons. This takes us back to post-Civil War traditions in American life, when the state sublet its function to private corporate entities and black people were forced into slavery by another name. Maresi Starsman then asks, we also see reform movements in the criminal legal system, like the election of progressive prosecutors, many of whom are black women who ran on platforms to reduce racial disparities in prosecution. Isn't that a positive development? Mumia Abu-Jamal responds, reform movements are playing around the edges of the problem. It is interesting that people think progressive prosecutors can mend this broken system, because in the end, they are still prosecutors. Their job is to put people in prison. And why are we not talking about changing judges or legislators who are also engines in this system? Or the media? The media play a remarkable role in driving mass incarceration in America. When people work their way out of the system after 20, 25, 30, or 35 years, it is the media making money by selling stories about the prisoner's redemption. When you look at the scope of the problem, the fact that millions of people are incarcerated and that the prison system has become a generational employer for the white rural working class, then you see the kind of economic and political impediment to the abolition of this system. We will never heal the social wound of mass incarceration by changing the prosecutors. I graded this interview excellent. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And next.
Yes, Black Americans are entitled to reparations. We've earned them. Tagline, the legacy of slavery and the centuries of theft it entails does not dwell in the long forgotten past for Black people. It's our now. From the publication The Washington Post, author and writer Michelle Singletary. Dear reader, some of my happiest moments were nursing my 3 children. As I looked down at their faces, their fingers tangled in my hair, I felt enormous peace and joy. I never took nursing my babies for granted because of one story my grandmother told me about her enslaved great-grandmother, Leah Drumright. Even her last name belonged to the plantation owner. Leah, who was caring for her own infant, was forced to nurse the baby of the white woman who owned her. And there was one strict rule. She could nurse her black baby only on her right breast. Leah's left breast was reserved for the white baby. The reason she was given was the left breast is closer to the heart, making the milk healthier, and the best milk had to be given to the white infant. One evening, overwhelmed from exhaustion after cleaning and cooking for the plantation owners, Leah was caught in the kitchen feeding her own black child on her own left breast. Seized with power of privilege fueled by rage, the white mother smacked Leah across the face. She followed the slap with a whipping, according to my grandmother. This story of the beating Leah endured that day has been passed down through the generations of my family. It's still very real and raw for me as another example of the indignities and brutality experienced by millions of Black people. And not just during the 246 years they were enslaved in America, but this isn't a story about Leah's left breast. It's about theft. It's about the legal systems in America that permitted robbing Blacks literally to the extent of stealing a mother's milk from her baby. That can't be fully undone unless the thievery is redressed. I graded this article good. Very, very good article. You should read it. Up next.
From the publication, The Conversation, entitled African Americans' Economic Setbacks from the Great Recession Are Ongoing and Could Be Repeated. From the writer Jessica Rinaldi, the financial crisis of 2009, the worst since the Great Depression, was hard on all Americans, but arguably no group felt its sting more than African Americans, who were already the most economically and financially vulnerable segment of the population going into it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, often highlighted the particular plight of African Americans in his crusade for civil rights. In 1967, during a speech in Harlem, he said, "If a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty, nor the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists." And even today, although Black incomes have recovered, African Americans are still making only 63% of what whites earn. Coupled with the net worth and home ownership figures not recovering and even regressed since the recession officially ended, it means that Blacks are still vulnerable to future economic downturns. I graded this article good. Excellent that it identifies how an already crippled Black ADOS people were savaged by the white elite predator class by way of the junk mortgage scam, have never recovered, and as a consequence were and are susceptible to further devastations from future economic calamities. Poor. This article was written in February 2019. A year later, ADOS has been faced with that economic and psychologically damaging event, COVID-19, where a significant portion has been guaranteed not to have incomes that will help us recover. The article never offered long acknowledged remedies like reparations or even a Black Marshall Plan that has been well deserved and long overdue. It merely did what most white domination racist media articles do, laments the tragic existence of the Negro. And next,
Jared Kushner faces criticism after saying Black Americans must want to be successful. From the publication CBS News, author and writer Christopher Brito. White House senior advisor Jared Kushner said on Monday that Black Americans have to want to be successful, a comment that was immediately rebuked online afterward and by the Democratic National Committee. Kushner's remarks came just over a week before Election Day, and as both President Trump and Joe Biden have fought for Black male voters. In an interview on Fox and Friends, Kushner said discussions about the issues that needed to be addressed in the Black community intensified after George Floyd's death in May. He slammed people for virtue signaling, on social media and criticized the NBA and WNBA for allowing players to wear social justice related messages on their jerseys and putting Black Lives Matter on basketball courts. Quite frankly, that was doing more to polarize the country than it was to bring people forward, he said. You solve problems with solutions. He then said Mr. Trump's policies can help black people break out of the problems that they're complaining about. But he can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful, he added. Kushner received sharp criticism for his remarks, including the Democratic National Committee spokesperson Brandon Gasaway, who said his comments about policy making for the black community were dismissive. According to the Trump administration, when African Americans find fault in policies that have led to historic unemployment for black families and an explosion of racial inequities and wealth gaps, and an uncontained global pandemic that has taken the lives of over 45,000 black Americans, it means that we just don't want to be successful badly enough. Gasaway said in a statement, in the eyes of this White House, demanding accountability for the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and countless other black men and women who have lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement is just complaining. I graded the criticisms in this article excellent. And up next,
from the publication The Guardian, entitled, in 2013, the Supreme Court gutted voting rights. How has it changed the U.S.? Tagline, the Supreme Court struck down a formula at the heart of Voting Rights Act. Now, voters who are discriminated against bear the burden of proving they are disenfranchised. Writers Sam Levine and Ankita Rao reported. 7 years ago today, the Supreme Court issued one of the most consequential rulings in a generation in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. In a 5-4 vote, the court struck down a formula at the heart of the Voting Rights Act, the landmark 1965 law that required certain states and localities with a history of discrimination against minority voters to get changes cleared by the federal government before they went into effect. Here are some ways voting rights have been stripped since 2013. Polling place closures, voter ID laws, proof of citizenship laws. The Supreme Court's decision didn't get rid of the Voting Rights Act entirely. Congress could restore the full power of the law by coming up with a new formula to determine which places need to submit their voting changes for pre-clearance. But since 2013, that hasn't happened. House Democrats passed a new formula late last year, but Republicans in the Senate have refused to take the measure up. I graded this article fair. Good that The Guardian covered an aspect of systemic institutional racist violence perpetrated by the Supreme Court, judicial systems, both political parties, and the minimized reporting by the media. Poor because The Guardian fails to disclose how the Democratic Party for the last 7 years has been purposely feckless in correcting white domination racist actions. Passing a formula only to have Republicans block its consideration is purposeful. For 7 years, they have not been on their bully pulpits like they have of immigrants in cages Obama built, pressuring media and researchers to make demands upon white domination racist issues. No, they just get to perform theater proclaiming how Republicans are stopping them, while our voting lines are getting longer, making their Democratic black gatekeepers Roland Martins cry. And next,
has Trump failed black Americans? From the publication Brookings.edu, authors and writers Rayshawn Ray and Keon L. Gilbert. I have done more for black Americans than anybody, except for the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. Donald Trump has repeatedly made this statement. However, many black Americans have not viewed Trump's first presidential term similarly. We cover some of the key concerns below. The economy. It is true that black unemployment was at an all-time low in February 2020 before COVID-19, yet the black unemployment rate under the Obama-Biden administration had one of the largest declines in American history following the Great Recession. Trump largely inherited a growing economy. However, when we look at the jobs pictures, in addition to the unemployment rate, we are concerned about the quality of those jobs. Quality jobs pay living wages and benefits. Blacks still continue to be concentrated in lower sector jobs, which do not have adequate health care or paid sick leave, and have disproportionately exposed them to COVID-19. For black men, job prospects are even more limited. In addition to facing more barriers to work entry, the available jobs often do not provide enough money for them to provide financially for their families. For these men, the labor market has failed them. Thus, their unemployment is not factored into the rate. In fact, research notes that 1.5 million black men are missing from social and economic life. Trump's recent Platinum Plan claims to increase investment in black communities by creating black small businesses and jobs. Despite the rapper Ice Cube's contributions, for some it is too little, too late. The Pay Protection Plan, PPP, from the Small Business Administration left black businesses out in the cold. Over 90% of black-owned small businesses that applied for the PPP funding were denied. I graded this article great. Add Trump's failures to the list of all the other presidents in the past. We seem to have a president problem. Up next,
From the publication, Huffington Post, entitled, Justice Department Quietly Stalled Investigation into Tamir Rice Case. Tagline, the DOJ effectively ended the civil rights investigation into the 2014 police killing of the black boy without telling the family, reported the New York Times. Written by Sarah Ruiz Grossman and Ryan J. Riley. Officer Timothy Lowen shot Tamir Rice, who was playing with a toy gun in a playground mere seconds after arriving at the scene. In late 2015, the county prosecutor announced that a grand jury decided not to charge Lowen with any crime. The Justice Department said at the time that it would continue our independent review of the case, but has been largely silent since. Subodh Chandra, a lawyer representing the Rice family, told the Times that the federal investigation had been the family's last hope for justice. The Government Accountability Project confirmed Thursday that it had been told last week by the Justice Department Inspector General that his office would not be investigating its whistleblower complaint alleging that Tamir Rice's case had been mishandled. I graded this report good that the New York Times is finally admitting what we all know. Poor the way too many black ADOS still permit Obama and Holder to grab limelights and stature they never earned and definitely don't deserve. And next,
Black and Latino voters flooded with disinformation in elections' final days. From the publication NPR, author and writer Shannon Boyd. Murphy Bennerman first noticed the post this summer in a Facebook group called Being Black in Arizona. Someone started posting memes full of false claims that seemed designed to discourage people from voting. The memes were trying to push the narrative of the system is a mess and there is no point in you participating, Bennerman said. She recalled statements such as Democrats and Republicans are the same. There's no point in voting. Obama didn't do anything for you during his term. Why should you vote for a Democrat this time around? Bennerman was alarmed. She had already been on high alert for these kinds of messages because of her job as Deputy Director of Election Protection Arizona, a nonpartisan group that helps people vote. Black and Latino voters are being flooded with similar messages in the final days of the election, according to voting rights activists and experts who track disinformation. These tactics echo Russian election interference on social media 4 years ago, when operatives working for the Kremlin-backed Internet Research Agency focused heavily on America's racial divisions, according to a Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russia's interference. No single group of Americans was targeted by IRA information operatives more than African Americans. By far, race and related issues were the preferred target of the information warfare campaign, designed to divide the country in 2016, the report said. This year, these campaigns are even more widespread, voting rights activists say. And while in most cases it's not clear who was behind the disinformation, the intent is unmistakable: to depress turnout among people of color by fueling cynicism and distrust in the political process. I graded this article poor and propaganda. There is a fine line between disinformation and legitimate questions regarding your favorite candidates, between disinformation and anger toward the actions of our two political parties. We are used to blindly voting and voting how we are told to vote, that anyone asking a question is a disinformationist, coming to steal your votes away because, after all, you still can vote. You can absolutely not listen to or pay attention to anyone that stirs up your cognizant dissonance. What? Somebody told me to think about what I'm voting for? Who wants to do that? Apparently, not you.
And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will be interviewing the article from The Atlantic, Why Biden Needs Black Men. Tagline, the Biden campaign is making its final pitch to energize an important constituency, written by Adam Harris. We'll be interviewing Adam Harris, where I will be providing the questions and Lisa will be giving the answers. Mr. Harris, you begin your opinion piece with the tagline, the Biden campaign is making its final pitch to energize an important constituency. My first question is, with Mr. Biden's as well as Kamala Harris's records, how is it that blacks, especially black men, have been treated as though we are an important constituency? What evidence can you cite in terms of material political benefits that black men can point to, that black people can honestly say Biden or Harris regards us as important?
Headliner's barbershop in Detroit. Out front, 4 barbers' chairs spaced 6 feet apart from a straight line, and one of them, Garland Gilchrist. The lieutenant governor of Michigan sits up, then leans on the right armrest, turning to Senator Kamala Harris, who occupies the seat next to him.
Oh, so your response is symbolism? A photo op gesture in front of a black barbershop where, due to Ice Cube's movies, America knows that black men speak together on relevant issues on black American lives? One of which deals with how we, for decades, have been taken for granted by the Democratic Party, where the Clinton administration drained aid to families with dependent children, calling it changing welfare as we know it, to appeal to the white collective sensibilities about black life, and the swelling of black men in prison aimed at black men, which devastated black American family formations, while further labeling black men as beasts, for procurement in the profitable prison industrial complex. Was any of this mentioned at that photo op?
Turning to Senator Kamala Harris, who occupies the seat next to him, all of us know somebody who has been affected or who has died, he tells the Democratic vice presidential nominee. That's happened to me 23 times since the pandemic hit. 23 goodbyes. Harris nods along.
I guess that's all she can do, given that both Republican and Democratic administrations cooperated in deploying black families into red line areas designated to be zoned in close proximity to America's polluting industries, thus making us susceptible to any and all kinds of diseases. Are you hoping that all the hype the coronavirus is getting will get us to forget all this, so that we can only be focused on these recent series of events where the Donald Trump administration obviously dropped the ball at Black America's expense? So Black America is supposed to forget how the Democratic Party has played a significant role in how sick we get because of this virus? Really? As though the term Cancer Alley and black people getting cancers disproportionately because of this has never been mentioned prior to Trump being in office? Really?
Since the pandemic began, more than 7,000 Michiganders have lost their lives to the coronavirus. Not a single one of them had to die. Their death was a policy failure that started with the failure in the White House.
You're speaking as though the phrases Cancer Alley and black people getting cancers disproportionately there, which is one among many comorbidities causing black people to die from COVID, has never been mentioned prior to Trump being in office. Come on, really?
Excuse me. You are missing the point of my article. Allow me to continue. Although black women have often been called the backbone of the Democratic Party, black men have not been reliably Democratic in such large numbers.
Well, let's discuss that. Haven't black men been more reliable than Latinx men and women in the 2016 election? Yet Obama signed DACA into law. Haven't black men been more reliable than white women during the election of 2016? Yet didn't Obama sign the Ledbetter legislation into law? Haven't black men been more reliable than white men voters through the Clinton and Obama years? Yet they largely benefited from Clinton's NAFTA and Obama's TARP programs, right? Despite their meth, crack, and opioid use, they did not get prison in the numbers black men have suffered at Biden and Harris's hands. What about that?
During the 2016 election, 98% of black women who voted cast their ballots for Hillary Clinton, whereas 81% of black men did.
Isn't voting supposed to be an exchange? What did black men get all those years from voting Democratic besides prison disproportionately?
Well, 14% of black men voted for Donald Trump. The Biden campaign knew going into the race that it would need to maintain that support Clinton received, but merely matching Clinton's numbers would not be enough. It needed to build upon them. The campaign recognized that its success or failure in energizing black men could dictate whether America had 4 more years of the Trump administration.
So what type of legislation has Biden encouraged Democrats in Congress to pursue that will tangibly make the lives of black men and women better, so as to encourage black men to vote for Biden and Harris, who've demeaned their lives for decades?
As millions of voters have begun mailing in their ballots and voting in person, the Biden campaign is racing to make its final pitches to the electorate, including black men. It has held virtual conversations with prominent black mayors, dispatched Magic Johnson to Detroit, and blanketed television and radio with ads designed to reach black men and avoid a repeat of 2016.
So I guess your answer is nothing beyond barbers shop photo ops and celebrating black faces in high places for more photo opportunities. Oh, and let's not forget buckets of words. By the way, where is Biden in this photo op? Is he avoiding someone bringing up his miserable record during this fake appeal to black male voters? Allowing a black woman to soften polite gentlemen's statements so it all can go off without a hitch? In case any one of them should bring up either of their records against black men, at least Biden wouldn't have been there for cameras to pick that up. Or is he avoiding these events due to being in a long-standing dementia spell?
4 years ago at a rally an hour and a half northwest of Detroit, Donald Trump asked what came to be an infamous question. You're living in poverty, your schools are no good, you have no jobs, 58% of your youth are unemployed, he said, referring to black voters. What the hell do you have to lose?
Yes, isn't it sad Trump could say that after and as a result of the Obama years?
He boasted in the audience in Demondale, a city that is 93% white, that after 4 years he would win 95% of black vote in the country. But 4 years later, one of every 1,000 black Americans has died during a pandemic that has disproportionately affected them. And the black unemployment rate is more than 50% higher than it was at the end of the Obama administration.
Come on, man. First thing, according to the CDC, at the end of almost every flu season or horrible virus since 1999, except for 3 years, blacks have died disproportionately. That's during Clinton's, Bush Jr.'s, and Obama's years. This pandemic has merely been a continuation of the same theme because of how the Republican and Democratic governments have assigned us bottom caste status. Second, this is virtually the same for economic downturns, to the point even when things are good, black men, especially, remain last hired and first fired. Jesus, man. Since the white elite robbery of 2008, black Americans, according to economists, have been in perpetual recession, while white folks recovered in 3 years. Yet you want your readers to believe Trump is responsible for all of our disproportionate deaths and disproportionate economic calamities? Really? Do you even see how you are attempting to corral black people into seeing only what is in front of us right now, as though recent history never occurred?
Still, the Biden campaign is not resting on that fact alone to get black men to turn out in 3 weeks.
They must be, since his team is not coming up with an exchange for our votes, only these symbolic photo ops.
A lot of black men were Trump curious in 2016, and they thought that he was some great businessman and prosperity would rain down from his administration. Representative Cedric Richmond of Louisiana, one of the Biden campaign co-chairs, told me recently.
Isn't this the same Representative Richmond who claimed that Mr. Ice Cube was unwilling to meet with the Biden team to discuss his plan for black Americans and Mr. Ice Cube called him on it? challenging Representative Richmond to come up with a Zoom meeting that could substantiate what actually occurred during that meeting? It has been about 5 days. Representative Richmond hasn't come up with it yet. Mr. Harris, you know, this sabotages your point you were about to make here, right? Representative Richmond has foolishly operated as a Biden apologist who has yet to provide evidence to support his claims against Mr. Ice Cube, which is embarrassing and makes him totally unreliable to support the point you are attempting to make here.
But although black voters helped catapult the Biden campaign in the Democratic primary, several polls among black men have remained consistent with the last election.
I thought so.
In one September survey of likely voters, black women again overwhelmingly support the Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden. But roughly 17% of black men say they plan to support the president.
So, Mr. Harris, are you attempting to portray or support a scenario that if the Biden-Harris ticket loses, it will be due to the fault of black men? Despite the fact that black men historically and largely have voted over 85% for Democrats. Take your 2016 totals and omit the number of black males who voted for Trump. Trump will still have won because of the Latinx and white women and white male votes he attained. Why aren't you and the white domination racist media doing stories on how these groups failed a white woman candidate for president? Are you keeping your job by setting America's black bottom caste up for more scapegoating?
Still, Richmond told me the campaign believes it can outperform those expectations by talking straight to black men about the things they're concerned about.
While what black men need is what black women need. Tangible material returns for our votes, Mr. Harris, not this ongoing Democratic divide and conquer gender wars that Democrats and their CIA friends in the media have been conjuring up since before Hillary Clinton was running. When the Democratic leadership decided to place their white bets on attracting recent immigrant populations with the prospect of being accepted into whiteness.
Look, you're not following the game, man. Bro, I gotta get paid in this environment. You're trying to mess that up for me, man. Listen, I'm done with this interview. I gotta go. I can't. There's no convincing you. I'm out.
Well, I guess we're done here. Since Mr. Harris has decided to leave, I will go ahead and provide you with the rest of the article in his own words. The boost Biden received from black voters in South Carolina rescued his primary campaign, and their support across the rest of the South sustained it. The campaign hopes they will buoy him in November as well. But the Biden campaign struggled with young black voters during the primary. In one February Morning Consult poll, 46% of black voters under the age of 45 said they would have preferred Senator Bernie Sanders. In late September, Vince Evans, who directed Biden's Southern political strategy during the primary campaign and now works as Harris's political director, went home to Florida and saw firsthand the lack of enthusiasm some young black men had for the former vice president. He wasn't sure he was going to vote, but I eventually got him there. Evans told me of one of his cousins, but he talked about the two things that were top of mind for him and the other young men in his family. And it was, what can we do to once and for all deal with systemic racism in this country and job security? According to a July survey conducted by American University in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia, Black Americans under the age of 30 were more likely to fear police brutality and less likely to trust that Democrats would do what it is in the best interest of black community. These are the voters the Trump campaign, a Channel 4 news investigation in the United Kingdom revealed, tried to deter from voting in 2016, and the ones it hopes will stay home in this cycle as well. The margins matter when it comes to black support. Some voters might be encouraged to vote for Biden because he's not Trump. As the media obsessed over how black voters would swing in 2004, one voter told the Chicago Tribune, "I'm not excited about Kerry, but he's the other guy. He's the alternative to Bush." Kerry won 88% of black votes that year. 4 years later, a record 95% of black voters supported Barack Obama's historic candidacy. But in 2016, Hillary Clinton was not able to hold on to the coalition Obama built. Even so, she matched Kerry's numbers, earning 88% of the black vote. An enduring unity at the ballot box is not confirmation that black voters hold the same views on every contested issue, but rather that they hold the same view on the one most consequential issue, racial equality. But will enough black voters show up to carry Biden? Though white college-educated women might be the bloc most likely to swing this election, the Biden campaign doesn't want to take any chances. Back outside of headliners, Gilchrist made clear Michigan's responsibility in electing Trump. This is the state Trump won by the slimmest margin of any state, 10,704 votes, a number that is seared into my mind for the rest of eternity, he said. But I challenge you that there are 11,000 black men in Michigan that can turn that around. On September 29, 7 days after Gilchrist and Harris spoke at the barbershop, Biden and Trump met on stage in Cleveland for the first Democratic debate. Trump bulldozed the conversation. He talked over the moderator, Chris Wallace. He interrupted Biden, but the steady hum of crosstalk subsided for a moment as Wallace briefly regained control. Why should voters trust you rather than your opponent to deal with the race issues facing this country? He asked both candidates. Biden alluded to America's unfulfilled promises, the equality guaranteed by the Constitution that has not been made available to all Americans. Trump knocked Biden for his work on the 1994 crime bill, which has dogged his candidacy, before pivoting to a muddy response about his support among law enforcement. But Richmond and the Biden campaign want to expand the conversation beyond that question. There are a number of things that highlight the urgency of this election. One is the racial awakening. But if we're talking about black males, that's nothing new. Richmond told me, systemic racism is nothing new when you've lived it. We didn't need 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a police officer on George Floyd's neck to know what was happening. The 41% of black businesses that have closed as a result of the pandemic, the 60% of black households facing serious financial problems, and the abysmal black unemployment rate after 4 years of the Trump administration offer a clear divide between Biden and the president. Richmond argued, we all know how Donald Trump is. The real question is who we want to be. And that completes this presentation. Listeners, you can get the link to this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. Wow. First walkout. Wow. So what did we think about this article?
Hated it. It was really a roundabout scapegoating article posing as a propaganda piece in support of a Biden candidacy, where if they don't win, black men will be at fault.
Everybody votes for the Democrats, and I don't think Democrats understand that. So in their efforts to preemptive, if Biden and Harris lose, then they'll have to have a reason, and that reason previously and looks like what they're preparing for now is for it to be black men, because you guys are so easy to target. and them exercising their voting rights, however it may be, whether it's for Democrats or for Republicans or however they feel, they have the right, just like all other Americans, to vote how they want to. When the data is released on who is voting for who and when and what, it will always be black men overwhelmingly voting for Democrat, black women overwhelmingly voting for Democrat. That means as a black family, we're voting for Democrats. Yet Democrats have the audacity in this time period to point fingers at their failures to connect with the voters, to connect with black men that they have in my opinion, left behind. In more ways than one, they're scapegoated, they're targeted. And the top of the ticket shows how they are targeted.
And this article, really gives it away in terms of the slanted nature of this writer who interviews directly black men, again, a selling point for black men, supposedly. Black men who are officials speaking up for the Biden campaign because they're in the Biden campaign. Another, again, an obvious giveaway as to their bias. I'm not looking at the real needs of black people, but they made one big mistake here. The Vince Evans gentleman who's working for the Harris campaign as a political director, he goes home and talks to one of the young men in his family. And one of the young men in his family says simply, ask a very basic question. And despite all these gender wars, what his question is based on how all black people are treated. I need to point that out. What can we do to once and for all deal with systemic racism in this country and job security? And never does the person who wrote this article, either himself or to the officials he interviews, answers that question, that fundamental question. That is a big problem. This young black man under age 30 is saying, what are we going to do about systemic racism? Instead, this writer goes on off into little tangents about how black officials are responding to the challenges of getting black men to the polls. That's the problem. They're not listening to the black men, and they're not dealing with the fundamental problems affecting all black lives, no matter male or female. And I'm very proud that in this article, black men under 30 that he interviewed, a relative in his family, he cares not just about what's happening to black men, and then we know how devastated they are. This young man under 30 cares so much about his black people that he's wondering what is the Democrat and Republican parties going to do to address all of our systemic problems as Americans, but specifically how black people are experiencing them. That was beautiful that he responded that way, and it's really sad how this article and the writer of this article was unwilling to even go there, to even go back to the officials and challenge them on that. Well, what was your response to that young man? Instead, he drifted off into some humdrum about black people still being there for Biden or not. It's absolutely insane. It's so obviously insane. That's why I wanted to be tough on this article, and it deserved it.
Whether or not Biden wins or loses is going to be because of black people, right? That's what
they're trying to set us up for, yeah.
So if he should happen to lose, it's black men who are less than 13% of this country's population
Makes
is
no
the reason
sense.
why they lose. But like you said, even standing in those lines, even other ways of cheating that is going on and suppressing the black vote, we're there, we're voting.
Mm-hmm.
We do it overwhelmingly. Find your boogeyman somewhere else, because the black man ain't it. The black family ain't it. We'll have a new president as we air this. We're able to get an official count. Who knows?
Well, just listen to Biden. He said it when reassuring the white domination, racist, elite predator class. Nothing fundamentally will change. So look for the plight. We know in the first 100 days he's not thinking about us. So in the first 100 days, hopefully more of us will realize that we need reparations and a black agenda, no matter who's in that White House.
We're coming to get our check.
There you have it, another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list and see the show notes for today's episode.
Be sure to tune in next Friday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
And remember, you can catch us live at 10 a.m. every Friday on WCRS 92.7 and 98.3 here in Columbus, Ohio. Also head over to our Patreon page to support the podcast as we give you weekly news and information important to our community. Until next time, family, stay safe and stay strong. Peace.
We're coming to get our check. 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 We're coming to get our check.